Welcome back, Tim Thiessen Live, broadcasting from the Tower District in Fresno, California. My next guest is Neil Zerlang. He's a land surveyor and engineer from Visalia. Neil is, just a disclaimer here, Neil has done quite a bit of work for me in the past and is doing some currently as we speak, revolving around property line issues, and he's done flood mapping and what have you for you. Neil, thanks for coming by today and visiting with us. Neil, kind of introduce yourself to the audience and a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we're going to talk some real estate issues.
Okay, well, just a quick correction. I am a licensed surveyor. I am not an engineer, so don't want to misrepresent that. I do have a civil engineer in my office. I've had my office in Visalia since 1986, and been serving the Central Valley with surveying and engineering services since then.
Okay. One of the hot topics has been coming up here recently, especially in Tulare County. Now, there's some in Fresno County that have been redrawn too, but like particularly for our viewers down in Visalia area, the federal FEMA had come in, the federal government, and redrawn some maps. And some of them, to begin with, based on the 1969 maps, in my opinion, were a little bit unfair to begin with, and then they redrew those, and they included a lot of structures and homes and what have you, on the north end of Visalia, that really changed the dynamics of home ownership. So why don't you walk us through that, Neil, just kind of what happened, how those maps were drawn, and what the impact has been here to our friends in Visalia.
Yes, and that's been a very complicated process. The changes took place in June of 2009. That's when the change was implemented. I work primarily in the Visalia area with these maps. We saw several things happen in the new flood zones. A lot of the northern portion of Visalia came into flood zones. A lot of the southwestern portion of Visalia was removed from flood zones. So we had a lot of things changing there. The other thing that happened, and more on a technical note, is the actual base flood elevations were recalculated. So with the onset of new flood zone or flood areas and new base flood elevations, just a tremendous amount of folks were affected by this new map, the new changes by FEMA.
Yeah, and what happens from a realtor's point of view and a homeowner and a home buyer is, say you've purchased property A and you're living there and everything is fine. No flood insurance was required, but if you are in a flood zone, for those of you that are purchasing, you'll find out that's one of the disclosures. If you're in a flood zone, you are required, if you're borrowing money and they're paying cash, that's a different story. You're on your own there, but you are required to purchase flood insurance to at least cover the amount of your loan, of your debt. And so we've had folks that have purchased a home, they were drawn into a new boundary, and they've had to purchase insurance. And some of those rates in some of the X or A zones are quite high. Had them run as high as $600 or $700 a month for insurance in certain areas.
Or higher.
Or yes. Higher, yes. So if you already have it, you can literally double your house payment. If you're not careful, just with the increase in flood insurance. Now, what can you do if you've been drawn in? Because you did a couple out in the Ivanhoe area for me where it became a requirement before the law changed because the previous loan company had neglected to fill it out, and so we were faced with a $1,000 a month premium on that property. What can a property owner do to kind of soften the blow?
Well, there's two things that can be done. First of all, we can do an elevation certification, and that is a FEMA certificate that we prepare and compares basically the height of the floor of the structure with a required base flood elevation if that has been established in that zone. Once we do the certification, it may be possible to actually do a LOMA application. A LOMA is an abbreviation for a letter of map amendment. And if the property meets the requirements for a LOMA, we can actually remove the property from the flood zone and eliminate the requirement for the flood insurance.
Okay, how much does that process cost, roughly, between the survey and all the documents that you'd need to prepare?
Depend on the location of the property. It runs between $400 and $600.
Okay,
If we can group properties in an urban area, we can actually lower that by about 20%, grouping 3 or 4 properties together.
well, let me tell you, if you are drawn into a flood zone, or if there's any question, it's worth the money. In the cases, that Ivanhoe property that you had really dealt effectively with that, there is, we went from the possibility of $1,000 a month increase in what the mortgage obligation was going to be, because the insurance topped on top of that, and your crew had come out and shot those elevations. We didn't get out of the flood zone, but we took that premium from over $10,000 a year down to about $500 per year.
Yeah.
So
We can't always do that. We can't always guarantee a reduction, but in my opinion, it's well worth the cost of the certification to find out for certain that you're paying the least amount possible for your flood insurance.
yeah, and very important too is down the road, if you sell your house and you do have that certification in place, because what it's going to do is when potential buyers and lenders see that this particular property is in a flood zone, right away that starts to raise flags, and people
Yes.
go, wait a minute, we'll find something that we can afford. So if you already have a cert in place, okay, it's going to become a selling point for you sellers out there. So I would highly recommend to know if your property is free and clear and paid for, call your insurance company, and just to make sure, because if the possibility exists that you may be selling or relocating in the next 3 or 4 years, it's very important you can have the documentation ready to go. And
Yes.
what it'll do, it'll help your real estate professional in their effort to sell your property. Something else that we deal with a lot, Neil, we've had a lot of experience here over the last few years, are property line issues. And
Yes.
most of them come up on ag properties, or a lot of suburban properties where you have a 2-acre parcel out in the country. Everybody likes a home in the country, but when a lot of these were split, they were not really done correctly. And so you're actually working on one for me right now. There's others that you've worked on in the past, and kind of explain what happens when original deeds are not drawn correctly and you think you own something and you really don't.
Well, there can be conflicts depending on how an original legal description was prepared, whether the language is correct. If there's discrepancies contained within that, we can end up with 2 circumstances: either an overlap of properties that the 2 descriptions or the legal description from each property will actually overlap each other, or the opposite situation is what we call a hiatus. The 2 legal descriptions won't meet and will leave a gap of a no man's land. So in those instances, we identify those problems. We try to get the property owners together to resolve that in the easiest way, and most economical way possible, which is usually some sort of a lot line adjustment procedure through a local county or city government.
Yeah, and it's very important. That's one thing when I'm representing buyers in a transaction out in the country, because of some of the near train wrecks that we've had. Thanks to your help, Neil, we had them all resolved so we can go ahead and close the transaction. When I'm representing a buyer, as part of my due diligence as a real estate professional, I always put right in the offer that I want those property corners identified by a licensed surveyor, so we know exactly what we have before we start.
Very wise, and I highly recommend that as well. Anytime you're buying a property, I would recommend that it be surveyed by a licensed professional, have the property corners identified, and avoid any of those problems that may come up.
Oh, absolutely, because you start getting into all kinds of conflicts in the law with prescriptive easements and everything else. But
so many things can come up.
But if you don't know, that's, the prescriptive easement law is just an absolute legal minefield. Judges hate it, attorneys hate it, nobody wants to go there.
No.
And I had a situation where Barbara and I used to live in Dinuba. There was our mutual friend Jim Self was doing some work for me, and I just needed to know where my property lines were before I put a fence in, and lo and behold, the whole neighborhood is off.
Yeah, domino effect.
And it was
situation.
everywhere else. Everybody was moving this way, that way, back and forth, and trying to get everybody together. But the bottom line is this, nobody really knew, so, there was a couple of neighbors that really had a problem with it. Nobody was losing anything. It's just that your property wasn't exactly where you thought it was. Everything shifted north 4 feet, shifted to the west about 20 feet. And so you're gonna have some encroachments and stuff. And so we took the position was that the prescriptive rule would not apply because we did not know.
Mhm.
But as of the date of that survey, now we know, and then the clock starts to run.
Right.
Because at that point, it didn't qualify as open and notorious use of somebody else's property.
Right, it was unknown.
It was unknown. And so that's very, very important. If you do know where your property lines are and somebody's encroaching, you need to deal with it.
You need to document it, you need to at least get some sort of communication in writing, even if you're not going to go to a large expense of relocating fences or structures, at least needs to be documented.
Also in regards to like lot line adjustments here, as we're bumping up here towards the bottom of the hour, easements come in all the time.
Mhm.
Now on, I don't know about Tulare County, but like Fresno County now will not grant an easement to a landlocked parcel. You may have to create a new parcel with a shovel handle in, but.
I believe they are requiring every parcel that's created to have frontage on a public roadway.
Right. But even existing parcels now, when they're doing lot line adjustments, I had that run into that.
If it's a county process,
Yes.
that would be correct. It could still be done on a private basis.
Right.
If you're not dealing with a government process, it can still be done privately.
Privately, yes, but if for some reason, because there was, in this particular property, there was some other issues, and so we had to go through county process.
Mhm.
And one of the adjoining parcels had not been split
Yes.
legally. And so in order to get everything done right, it hadn't been removed correctly from the Williamson Act, and on and on and on.
Yep.
And it was quite interesting. I spared you getting involved in that because the sellers already had an engineer they were working with. And but what they actually had to do was to maintain the integrity of the one parcel in the back is they would not allow any easements, and so they had to do a lot line adjustment with the neighbors.
You know,
And they literally made a shovel handle of the parcel down to the county road.
cross
so
the
that-
driveway so that they could get in.
Yes,
Mhm.
and so that you can have access on that.
Mhm.
For a word, do you have any words of caution for any potential buyers as far as making sure that their realtor researches when you're purchasing a property as far as any easements that have been granted to anybody?
Well, your real estate professional is your first person that you'll be dealing with, would have a chance to compare the actual property physical site and appearance with the legal documents. So, hopefully that they are able to identify any potential problems. The second thing is, as we mentioned earlier, I'd always recommend that property corners be identified by a licensed land surveyor or licensed professional.
So anyway, well, Neil, thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to be going to a short commercial break here, and we're coming back with Mike Harris from the Brotherhood of the Badge. Great segment coming up. Stay tuned.